So it's always good to start out the day with natural disasters, and this session is really focusing on things that are within the sphere of influence of our community. The session is Bridging the Digital Divide, Empowering Youth for a Digital Future. As technology reshapes every aspect of modern life, the digital divide continues to widen, leaving many young people without equitable access to the skills, tools, and resources they need to thrive. Ensuring that the current generation is prepared for the realities of the digital world with the advent of AI has never been more urgent. This session is going to explore strategies to bridge the widening digital divide by focusing on access, skills, and community-driven support systems. And we have a truly remarkable panel here, most of whom have at least a quarter of a decade experience in this arena. There are in-depth bios, of course, on the website. Just touch briefly. Danny Allen is with us. He comes to us from the private sector, and he has a career focused on network security, cloud engineering, and infrastructure design. But I'd also note that Danny has been incredibly involved in community-related efforts, and in particular focused on youth and the digital divide, both in his community in Oakland, in larger spheres in the state and the country, and also internationally. Terry Loftus joins us. He is the Chief Information Officer and Assistant Superintendent in the San Diego County Office of Education. Terry is among the leaders and visionaries in terms of security, in particular in the K-12 sphere and beyond. But he's also, in San Diego is, I think, a remarkable county in the greater integration of all of the segments there, working towards common ends, and in particular, trying to address the digital divide. Matt Rantanen, well, I guess Matt is just a force of nature, and we're very lucky that Matt joined Cenic through our Golden State Net effort to really try and ensure that tribal communities are not left outside in this latest round of massive investments in digital equity. And I think he'll maybe tell us a little bit about how that's going on. But he has vast experience in all areas of IT, but especially in terms of empowering underserved communities, and particularly indigenous communities, not just in the United States, but across the globe. Lastly, Raul Rincon, who's a Senior VP at Cenic, and has been with Cenic for almost a quarter of a decade, and 22 years, I guess is close enough. He's done all kinds of things at Cenic, and is increasingly responsible for all of our engagement activities and all of our equity activities. And like a lot of his peers at Cenic, an absolute gift, not just to Cenic, but to the broader community. So with that, I will turn it over to Raul, who's going to lead the panel.
Thank you, Louis. Appreciate that. So I'm really excited to have the three people with me today that have been working on this as Louis introduced them. I just want to see if we'll go through each of you real quick and see if you want to add anything more onto your bio before we dive into here. So, Terry?
Sure. Thanks, Raul. Honored to be here. Good morning, all. Good to see you. So as mentioned, I serve as Assistant Superintendent CIO for the San Diego County Office of Education, but two other hats I wear is it's a privilege to serve on the Cenic board with a number of esteemed colleagues. And on the cybersecurity side, as mentioned, I've been deeply involved with the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center, or MSISAC, that serves our broader state, local, tribal, and territorial community across the United States. And so working with those thought leaders, state CISOs, and so forth in recent years, and serving myself as the chair of the MSISAC, has been great to have the insights of both the Cenic the colleagues on the board, and also the board at MSISAC to really look at the digital divide in various ways. And so I know I'm looking forward to our conversation today, because I'm really thinking about the digital divide these days in kind of two buckets. One is really the equity and belonging side of it, and then the security and safety side of all of these considerations, whether it's connectivity or devices or AI, or a range of other topics that really all kind of fit under the umbrella of the digital divide. But again, looking forward to this morning's discussion.
Awesome, thank you. Danny, did you have anything to add on to the eloquent introduction?
I think just briefly, we always talk about technology, but we talk about it kind of in a vacuum. I think we always have to step back and look at the human side of it. What are we doing this for? I mean, you can look at it from the perspective of, you go into tech and you make a lot of money, but the other side is really, how do we help people? And so in my career, it's really been about applying the technology to a problem. What is the problem to be solved? And looking at the problem to be solved, how do you do it such that you impact the most people and have the most good from it? So that's kind of the background in which I look at things.
Thanks, Danny. Matt, anything to add on for yourself?
Sure. So having served 25 years with the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association, building out the Tribal Digital Village Network, which is connected to Cenic at the head end, I've been informed from the ground up for quarter century on the needs and the just basic understanding of the community. I've lived on the Rincon reservation for 5 years, and then bought land in between two reservations in Southern California, and I'm in and around the community a lot, so I get a lot of exposure to that. But at the same time, I'm at the National Congress of American Indians. I've been there for 13 years as the co-chair of their Tech and Telecom subcommittee, forming policy, supported by 360 member tribes out of the 576 nations, making sure that opportunity and the barriers to entry are broken down over those years. And then most recently, coming up on 5 years now in June, is the tribal broadband boot camps. So I co-founded those with my friend Christopher Mitchell from Institute for Local Self-Reliance, and we have been delivering soup to nuts, basically everything that is broadband for your tribal community. It's really wrapping people's heads around the concept of managing their own networks, and taking on the responsibility of managing communications, because communications is not being brought to them by the carriers or the typically the incentives by the federal government. So the tribes are going to be responsible for managing those communication networks most of the time moving forward. So very, very engaged. We've served 95 tribes and 500 attendees over the last 4.5 years. So thank you.
Awesome, thanks, Matt. I promise we won't keep going round robin, so feel free to jump in. I did want to circle back to a few things that you all said. So Terry, you're talking about equity and belonging. Can you expand on that for us?
Yes. So, and looking at the digital divide, I think the scene has shifted somewhat. So, we know that when we think about a decade or more ago, it was all about kind of the pipes, if you will, right? Getting everyone connected, and thinking about how we're reaching folks with physical infrastructure, and we're obviously still working on that to this today. And Golden State Net and Middle Mile Broadband Initiative and so forth. All great work, but to a degree, we have not solved that, but we've got some of the answers to the test. And so one of the other three pillars, so if we think about the connectivity, the devices, and then the training, the engagement, the literacy as the kind of the three pillars, I think we really have some big opportunities when it comes to thinking about the training, the awareness, the fluency, particularly around AI, because when we think about these elements, access is no longer the only thing you need, and that is that's what undergirds all of this, right? So we absolutely need those pieces, but Cenic and other brands have done a really stellar job in this space. So I guess for me, it's more thinking about the access and allowing students to have agency in using these tools, because at the end of the day, if we provide a student with a device or high-speed connectivity and they don't have the technology or the AI literacy, they're still left behind. They're still disconnected in a way, right? So a lot of thoughts on this, but yes, at kind of a high level, it's looking at those three elements and how they are working together in concert. And I think certain areas, again, we've taken great strides. Obviously, the connectivity and devices, at least for my space in K-12, for everyone, the pandemic exacerbated the haves and the have-nots. And thankfully, with federal funds and so forth, there has been a big move forward. I mean, for decades in K-12, we talked about one-to-one programs as being kind of the high watermark, and some had it and some didn't, and mostly the under-resourced or smallest school districts or rural areas did not have these devices, this technology, and we've solved a lot of that. At least in our county, the vast majority, almost all, we're almost at 100% as far as devices in students' hands. But again, there's also knock-on effects to that as well. So we had one-time federal funds, ESSER funds, and other supporting funds that were great. And so schools were able to invest in devices, but now we're about 4 or 5 years out. And what happens to devices after 4 or 5 years? And if you don't have the dollars to refresh those. So that's a big challenge that a lot of my colleagues are facing, from a device standpoint. But again, the training, the literacy, and what's on the horizon and what's happening now around AI, in my mind, is the bigger concern when we use that label digital divide.
Yeah, totally makes sense. So Danny, and something that you mentioned, Terry, sorry, leads me into thinking about Danny's first comments. So you're talking about giving students agency, right? Mm-hmm. So I know, Danny, that goes to me, human side, impact, things that you worked on. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think, when we talk about the digital divide, at its most rudimentary place, it's about economics. And again, technology is good for a number of things, but when we talk, in fact, Frank mentioned this earlier in his keynote about people working together. And if you really look at how do we make progress against an economic issue, it comes down to going back to teams, and especially being focused on community. If you really want to do something fundamentally good for sustainability, you have to look about bringing everybody, this is your inclusivity piece, bringing everybody into the tent. It doesn't matter if they're rural or urban, on the tribal lands, global. If you can bring everybody together and get the benefit of everybody's experience, their thoughts, and especially people who've had problems, who've lived through problems. For you to really be innovative, you have to have lived or at least experienced a problem. The only way to solve a problem is to give it thought, but from a lot of different perspectives. So it's this diversity of thought, this diversity of experience, but bringing, especially in terms of the children in adults too, I guess, in an AI environment, is to look at how do we utilize these tools, these technologies, as a team, looking at it from different perspectives, bringing everybody in, and maybe being a little chaotic at first, but working toward a solution that's beneficial for everybody. How do we get them to solve their problems? And in solving their problems, especially for small businesses, regardless of where they're located, how do we get these young people, some who've graduated in computer science and can't find a job, others that are in high school or junior high school that have difficulty just getting to school or feeling well enough because they haven't had a meal, any number of things. And also, not just on the lower rungs of society, those at the upper levels. You get children from wealthy school districts to work with others. You have to bridge the gap, not just in terms of the economics, but in terms of that mind space. But I think ultimately, if you can get people to work together in teams, focusing on problems that raise all boats, I think you have an opportunity for growth and to minimize the digital divide. But ultimately, you look at, especially the United States, but across the world right now, the wealth gap is this thing is on steroids. You've got to think about, okay, but how do we do the most good for everybody? Because you don't need people suffering, being homeless. You don't need people suffering, not having food. The problems that were mentioned before on the ag side, yeah, we're going to have water problems. We're going to have food problems. We're going to have problems overall. But how do you solve them without having some experience, some insight to it? And that requires you to bring everybody together.
And I think you make a really good point. There's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Definitely not.
Definitely not. Matt, is that something you want to lean into a little bit?
Yeah, I think the not one size fits all applies to reservations probably more than anywhere else. There's, you can't cookie cutter a solution and provide it to all the tribes and have results that are effective. You have a variety of obstacles in Indian country. I mean, we're talking about some of the problems with, the knowledge base and the utilizing the technology and things like that. And we're still, as Terry alluded to a little bit, we're still building the pipes to a lot of these places, right? So a lot of these reservations are just now stepping into the process of actually building a community network that serves their tribal buildings, and then community network that eventually serves their homes. If they're lucky and they got funding in the last rounds that have now dried up, you have a fiber to the home project. If not, you have a wireless to the home project, and in some cases just a network that serves their community buildings. So there's a variety of outreach and interaction that needs to take place in a number of different ways to make sure that people get engaged. Some of those communities that don't have a service to their home, they have to have a functional, active library that's engaging and a safe place to be. After school programs, resource centers, and things like that are very crucial. One of the original initiatives of the Tribal Digital Village Network was to build resource programs, after school resource programs on every reservation that network touched, and partner with local universities, tutors, and things like that to be able to engage and make sure that those folks have access to the tool sets and the understanding of how to grow with this technology. And now we're seeing this technology leap again, exponentially with AI, leaving a big chunk of folks behind that are just now getting into the space. So it's a little haphazard with some of the the candy red buttons that are AI, with folks that are barely aware of sort of the pitfalls of the general internet. So they immediately embrace this big button and then they send a bunch of proprietary sovereign nation information and files down a public pipeline that now other people have access to. So there's sort of a moral obligation to teach the structures of how AI gathers data and uses data and what it means for sovereign information and enrollment records and history of families and such, and the financial histories and things of tribes when you have potentially a clerk that's like, I really need to do a summary for this thing that they want me to do, and I just want to feed it the information and get this summary back. It'll be so easy, button, and then here's the financials of the tribe and some of the enrollment history and some of the economic development history now in the public sphere. So we are a little cart before the horse in a couple of cases. We're kind of doing circles or donuts, if you will, with a cart and a horse. So it's a variety of sort of slow down and speed up at the same time methodologies.
Yeah, I always appreciate Matt's perspective and what he brings from the tribal communities and beyond. And I guess I would piggyback on that from a standpoint of, I would advocate that we really think about what we're doing around whether it's connectivity, devices or instruction and training, really focusing on those with the greatest needs, those that have been historically underserved, because that's where we see transformational changes. So in education, we deal with a number of things. You might be familiar with some terms like universal design for learning, UDL, or I don't know if you might be familiar with the curb cut effect, but maybe especially if someone is from Berkeley, because I think it was Ed Roberts from Berkeley that started this, was in a wheelchair as a result of polio. But the curb cut effect, in just a nutshell, is really when you're designing something for those with disabilities, special needs, in our case, like multilingual learners, et cetera. It's not something separate and distinct that is only for that population. It's something that is transformational and in many cases exponential. So the curb cut effect is around back in the 60s when, again, this graduate student advocate from Berkeley essentially said, hey, why is it so difficult to transition from the sidewalk and so forth? And so they broke up actual curbs and forced the city to essentially make the early ramps. And what they found was it wasn't only beneficial to those that were in wheelchairs, it was beneficial to the UPS guy that had, the big stack of boxes on the dolly. It was beneficial to the mom or dad pushing the stroller. It was beneficial to, and I could go on and on and on. There was a million positive knock-on effects. And so if we think about in our overall design of these solutions, again, in all of these three buckets, we're going to see huge returns on focusing, again, on those with specific or the greatest needs, or those, again, that have been left behind. So I appreciate the mention about tribal communities. We're regularly thinking in education about our special education students and students with disabilities and so forth. What does this mean for them? I was sharing it at yesterday's lunch with some of my colleagues that probably one of the single most exciting things in my mind around AI is how it can be used for our students with disabilities. So we run a number of programs in San Diego that are, we have a school called Friendship School, and it's students with severe disabilities, all sorts of severe medical needs, and so there's whole teams of people per each student. And so, it's not uncommon to be asked for, hey, do we have an iPad tool that we can help a nonverbal student communicate with others? And again, what we've had over time has really been kind of, a patchwork. It's been duct tape and glue, and the promise of AI, at least my hope for AI, is that those populations, those individuals, those members of our community, that it is uplifting them and empowering them.
Awesome. Danny, I'm going to pick on you a little bit because I saw you taking notes. So,
No, yeah, you could tell I'm a little young. Just tying it all back together, you talk about the digital divide, and of course, it's basically economics. Access, Terry mentioned about access, just having the tools is the next part of that one. And AI has this great ability to democratize. And then, of course, it has the opposite side as well. But having the network connection, having the laptop or desktop, preferably a laptop, something that the students can move around with. Think about a child that's been out in the fields working, and just farm labor kind of thing. And this is one of the things I worked on a long time ago. But, they're out in the fields. There's like no school right there. There's no library. And the thing that they could do, because they miss so many days of school, the thing that they could do is get on the bus at some point and get to the nearest library. And of course, it's going to be late in the day. Hopefully the library is still open. But we had a conversation the other day about maybe them having Wi-Fi access beyond the building, so that the student could at least do some makeup work or at least learn. AI tutors, I think, was another part that Frank mentioned that made a huge difference. If we can organize it such that the students have an opportunity to work through any subject, because getting a degree is great, and it says you've survived That's the way I went to Swarthmore, so for me, it was really about survival. But you survived this training. Sometimes you go in and you learn a lot, and other times you you regurgitate to get past the test. But to have an AI tutor to help you really absorb the material, those little gaps where you don't have a mentor or a human tutor, I think that makes a big difference. But the tools, but again, if you can focus on some problems and work it as a team, working together, it's that old saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And it's the same exact, I mean, it's kind of funny, I used to think my parents were saying some crazy stuff, but now I kind of believe it. But really, if you could just work together, I think it makes a big difference. And if we change the education model such that it's not just kind of teaching you to, this rote kind of thing, make it such that more like a hackathon in some respects. Saying, okay, this group of 4, this group of 5, whatever, I want you to work as in teams, but this isn't about really competition. This is about just these small teams working on a problem. And then we want to fine tune it. It's something we did in design thinking. First you want to get an idea of what the problem is. So you think, oh, okay, yeah, we need to have these machines, these flying machines, and then you go and you ask somebody, and they say, well, we really just want to get across the street because of the traffic. Okay, so you keep working through it, and then you finally come to some idea of what you need to do. And then you start to prototype it, and as you go to prototyping, you go back and you validate against the requirement, and then you just keep modifying it until you get better and better and better. And I think that's what we have to do in utilizing the tools to really bridge this gap and make a difference, and ultimately to make a difference in people's lives. Some will get wealthy, most will not. And I think it's not about wealth, it's about what you contribute back to your community. And I think if you can get the children involved in that, it's a better bet. And especially if you think about all the kids who've gone to school and gotten degrees and can't get a job. I mean, that's crazy. You spend all that time, all that money, and you can't get a job, but you can take that experience that they've had in the challenge of going and getting a 4-year degree, and somebody, even in kindergarten, everybody has an opinion. Just kind of bring them together and get an idea, synthesize it so that you can come up with a good solution. I think we'll be doing much better. So that's what my notes were about.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So I think, we've talked about access, we've talked about tools, we've talked about giving students agency. I think along with that is something that, Terry, you mentioned at the top, was this security concerns and how to start addressing that. So how are you guys working through that?
That's a great question. So I'd say we're coming at it from a couple of different ways. So when we think about safety and security, yes, we think about the cybersecurity pieces and looking at and evaluating the tools that we're considering, right? Whether it's LLMs or narrow AI tools or things that are incorporated into existing curriculum, looking at how data is processed. Again, when we think about K-12 education in particular, we really are in a place where we have vast troves of highly sensitive data. And I shared this with some folks yesterday, but it struck me that in a few years back, you might have heard Los Angeles Unified had a big cybersecurity incident, and I got a call from a New York Times reporter, and they said, well, so just tell me, what's the big deal about having student grades stolen? I said, okay, let's have a little bit of a conversation here. And we ended up having a great, rich hour-and-a-half conversation about how, if you think about K-12 education, and I know our higher ed friends are similar to this, but it's almost like a multi-layered or multi-pillared organization. And so, yes, we're doing teaching and learning and kind of those professional services that you would classify that as. The financial services, I mean, literally in our state, a third of our state's budget goes to education, right? Approximately. fourth largest economy in the world. That's a lot of dollars that are flowing into schools, county offices, state level agencies, et cetera. And so we're managing all of that financial data. We're also places of healthcare for students. We've got nurses, we've got LVNs, we've got, details on students' medications and again, disabilities and so forth. We are food service agencies, we're transportation agencies with busing and routing. And so I won't belabor the point other than to say, in this age of AI, we need to still take in all those items into context. Where is that data going? How is it being used? How is it flowing potentially, to third-party data brokers or being used to train models? And again, in many cases, we're talking about very, very young members of our communities. And so how are we protecting that? How are we, we're spending a lot of time right now on how are we vetting, testing, and evaluating AI tools, both from an instructional and pedagogy standpoint, like how is it going to be beneficial to students, and also kind of the other side of the house, how is it effective and efficient for our business services departments and our transportation teams and so forth? How can we get efficiencies out of AI and looking at that element? But then also teaching students, much like we do with digital citizenship, and thinking about AI tools don't always give you the right answers, right? Thinking about hallucinations. Many of these things are getting better as the technology evolves. But thinking about those elements from that context, thinking about, we know that it's rife with bias, many of these models and so forth. And so how are students taking this information as not being, factual right out of the gate? How are we interrogating that as a student? So it's teaching from that standpoint. How are we equipping the students with the tools, kind of like we've done in prior years, that, hey, here's how you look out for a phishing email, and make sure that you're mindful that there really isn't a Nigerian prince that's trying to get you to take $5,000 that you can keep half of yourself. So it's that instructional piece and thinking about those elements. The last piece I'd mention, and again, this is kind of going down into the weeds, but one of the key things that we have seen is really the adoption or the use of AI by young people as companions. And so the social emotional pieces we're deeply concerned about, and that falls under our umbrella of safety and the social emotional well-being of our students and our communities. And so an organization, Common Sense Media, last year did a very in-depth study. About a third of students under 16 were engaging with AI as a companion, as a friend, to ask advice, to engage with in ways that were sometimes benign and sometimes very harmful. We've seen those terrible stories of students that ultimately committed suicide or self-harm as a result of their interactions. Not necessarily huge on lots of legislation myself, but I do applaud California being out front. Senate Bill 243 came out and went live in January of this year. It's the AI companion chatbot law that essentially puts guardrails and penalties and fines around some of these companies that were taking that social media approach of let's aggressively get as many users, as many eyeballs as possible, and really not caring about any safeguards, any rules of the road, any safety elements. So legislation like that, again, I credit our state to being out front on some of these items. And as a quick side note and addendum, I'm very concerned about the federal level saying that states can't set their own rules around AI, but that's probably a whole nother panel. So I'll leave it there, but there's a lot of things that we're thinking about when it comes to the safety and security of our students, our staff, and again, the communities that we serve.
Awesome. So that, Matt, I want to circle back because you were talking about that, talking about data security, use of tools, what people understanding what they put into things and where it could possibly go, right? So how are you dealing with the push of wanting to use these things, but the kind of the pull on the security side of making sure that they're being used correctly and that people can trust what they're using?
Well, there's a big conversation in the Indian country right now around digital sovereignty. So the pathways that your data travels, the housing of your data, whether it's housed in proprietary sovereign land servers or if it's on AWS, and whether or not that data, because it is sovereign inherently, is it still sovereign when it's on AWS? Does it still have the same protections as if it were sitting on a tribal reservation in a server in a small data center on a tribe? So, some of those parameters are being defined as we sit here and talk, right? So there are a lot of perspectives on, on what I think the extreme perspective is that tribal sovereign data is sovereign no matter where it is, no matter where it lives. And somebody else shouldn't have the ability to cough that data up to the FBI or wherever, whoever's asking for it. But the legal structures are not in place to enforce it. at the moment. So then you have a lot of tribes just, and this is really how I work, is like when all that chaos is going on, we just get low under the radar and just get stuff done. And so building small data centers, small regional data centers on different reservations, working from tribe to tribe to house backup and storage of each other's data in sovereign communities. So I'm going to give an example of the Hoopa Valley tribe. Linnea and Speggy have been here and spoken at Cenic before. They are running an ISP for their community, and they've built out $65 million worth of infrastructure. They're building a small data center, and through the tribal broadband boot camps, they've been introduced to the Mohawk Network folks at Akwesasne and the Tohono O'odham folks in southern Arizona. And now those three tribes are talking about, hey, what if we stored our sovereign proprietary data on servers encrypted, but in your sovereign territory, in your sovereign data center, and that way we have a live backup that we can go utilize at any point, but it's still in sovereign space. And if somebody comes after your sovereign space, we're going to defend it. You're going to defend it the same because it's sovereign, and our data is sovereign in your space, and yours is sovereign in ours. So that's really the evolution of the conversation at the moment, sort of at the ground level or at the science level. The politics level is a little different. You have ASU leaning in hard on tribal digital sovereignty. You have the National Congress of American Indians partnering with them to try to define and sort of lay ground rules to this space. But then at the ground level, you actually have people building and doing things that are very functional under the radar.
So how do you deal with it when it's going into systems where you can't control the data?
Yeah, that's the legal scenario, right? So not a lawyer, thankfully. But I think there's a lot of common sense, logical structure and legal things that need to be put into place. The hardest point in this administration is enforcing any of this because, rules are out the door. So you can be mindful of rules and you can set structures and legal parameters and things, and somebody's just going to throw them out the door and go get it anyway. But I think we still should go through the practice of doing that because eventually we will be able to play in the fair sandbox again, and there should be structures in place and understandings of how to behave around that space. So it is going to take some tribal legal expertise in Indian law as well as sovereignty law, and then whether or not they can enact those types of protections outside of a reservation, a sovereign space, or not. I mean, I think TBD on that one. Yeah.
And I'll keep going on that one just for a second because I'm kind of curious. How does that translate into user training and how you're operating now? Because you gave some examples of some not so great information being put in places you don't want it.
Yeah, so there's a responsibility for tribal governments to set a protocol on the management and use of AI by their staff. It's just responsible computer usage. It's the next tool. The tool happens to be sort of morally vague and you can expose a lot of proprietary data to a public set of eyes that you may not be intending to do. So there really needs to be an understanding at the tribal leadership level, administration and/or IT level, and that needs to be implemented throughout their community, right? So if you work with the tribe-sensitive records, if you're in the tribal office and you're managing that data, here's your set of protocols, and don't step outside of them. It's no different than like HIPAA compliance and Child Internet Protection Act. All of those things all apply to AI as well. So it's really just making sure that there's enough education at the leadership level to be able to impose those structures so that they don't accidentally get taken advantage of. But a lot of tribes are a little bit behind in the curve on understanding these things, and so without any outside influence, a lot of mistakes are being made.
Understood. Danny, I'm going to pick on you again because I saw you taking more notes, but I do have a question for you once you talk to us about what you've been writing down.
I don't know about you, Raul. No, I was thinking, just thoughts. Trust is the primary issue. The thing in business, especially as you build applications, and large portion of my career outside of the network and security and cloud engineering stuff is building these trust systems, and especially for data on AWS, Azure, and other places. But just thinking through how you would put that stuff together and at the same time move toward digital literacy, because I think a lot of the fear of these tools, in some cases, really well placed. Some of the fear is that if you don't have any familiarity with the tech, you don't have an internet connection, you don't have a laptop, you don't have whether it's Claude or ChatGPT or any of them. If you don't have any familiarity with it, it's so hard for you to wrap your brain around. And your natural inclination is to withdraw because it's beyond your trust levels. On the other side of the coin is if you have, and again, I keep thinking about children, and I'm a child too, just a little older.
12.
You're 12? Okay.
I'm 13.
I don't know. You guys might be a little younger than me, but anyhow, but I keep thinking of how do you get people to the point where, and especially elders, where they trust something? It's through the children. The children are that they trust the child. At least I hope they do. They trust the child, and then the child introduces something and they go, okay, show me that, show me more. And they get used to it. I remember, I think it was in Philadelphia or New York. Anyhow, I was on the subway and I remember seeing, this is just after the iPad came out. And I saw these, I'm gonna call them older women, because I was younger at the time. It was a long time ago. But I remember them all using the iPad and really getting into it and thinking, wow, I'm not even all that familiar with it. But, if they feel all that comfortable with it, maybe I should pay attention. And I'm working with mainframes and all this other stuff, and a lot of systems that I'm not supposed to be talking about. Anyhow, but I think you got issues of trust, you got issues of data integrity, data governance. You got all these things to consider. I think the AI tools properly set up can make a difference. I think it's more that you want AI to solve something for you. So say you created it, the democratizing piece, you created this application, but you need to point it toward different data sets. And what's to say that that data set can't be manipulated by somebody else that has access to it? Or if you got to put the decrypt key in for this thing, what's to say that isn't replicated someplace else? Those are the things you worry about. But again, with trust, if you can get younger people engaged, and especially those who've gone to school, maybe done cybersecurity kind of training, which seems to always be changing. But if you can do that, I think it makes more sense. You can work through these problems. But again, it's community, working in community, and working to bring all groups in, especially those who, we call them differently abled, whether they're autistic or they're visually impaired or whatever the deal is. You need everybody. I mean, the truth is you need absolutely everybody because the intelligence is spread equally throughout the population. It doesn't come with a certain ethnicity, height, girth. It doesn't, what language you speak. You need everybody. You need to look at this thing across the board. And if you really want trust, and I think it was something you said, Terry, about the knock-on effects for the ramps. And I always think, we got these people designing systems. You know, you go into an office building and you need to go to a certain floor. You go to this little pedestal and you punch in which floor you want to go, and it tells you which elevator and elevator bank to go to. Who that's visually impaired would be able to do that? I mean, you got to think about it. You've got to work at it from different angles. But yeah, I'm just going on. Sorry. But it's about trust and being open to difference.
Terry, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just the trust piece. I appreciate you bubbling that up, and I did want to circle back to an important point that Matt touched on, which is yes, the young people, the students, et cetera, but also the leaders. So you talked about tribal leaders. I spent a lot of my time with leaders in K-12 around these various topics. So because we know that we've got folks out there that have reached out, or even folks that have served on some of our boards of education that say, you know what, let's be like, you know, this one nation in Europe that says they're not going to incorporate any AI in K-12. It's going to be outright banned for everyone, and we're just going to do things like we have been. And then there's others that are the Wild West. Let's have competitions and let's see how many different LLMs teachers can use, and give them no rules, guidelines, or training or assistance, which is also has the potential for very negative outcomes. And so building that trust, again, whether you're in whatever type of organization you're in, with that leadership team, with the folks that are engaged from your communities. You know, the K-12 communities are historically very engaged populations, right? I'm guessing we have lots of parents in the rooms, and you care deeply about the success, growth, you know, of your students, of your children. And so, so yeah, that trust piece is very important, and those conversations are important. I mean, even the recent, everyone saw in the news about the kerfuffle between the Department of War and Anthropic, and then, you know, OpenAI, I think very poorly timed, cavalierly saying, oh, we'll sign an agreement. We don't care about, you know, surveillance of our fellow Americans. We don't care about fully taking the human out of the loop when it comes to military actions. And again, the topic is far more nuanced than that, to be clear, but that's what people are seeing in the news. And so then I'm getting emails, we're not using OpenAI, right? We're not using ChatGPT. We don't believe in, you know, what their ethics are. And we've always had that in technology. But as we know, AI is that on steroids. It's that to the, you know, the nth degree, an order of magnitude more powerful, more complex, evolving way faster than any other prior technologies. And so, again, how you have those conversations, how you inform people, how you raise awareness. Because again, we have a digital curriculum for students around digital citizenship, being safe online, and all of these other elements. And where possible, we try to leverage the students to bring it back to their parents and train them, hey, you also should be on the lookout for phishing emails, for example, or whatever it might be. And AI is even more complex. It's a bigger topic. It's moving much faster. And so that's going to be an ongoing challenge for all of us. Again, whether you're in K-12, higher ed, government, private sector, you know, having the relevant people informed, not that they all need to be deeply fluent and be using these tools and be a subject matter expert, so much as understanding the pros and cons, having general understandings, so that when they're working on implementing AI or leveraging tools within a given, you know, work lane, that they know what the outcomes could be, both positive and negative. So I appreciate you bringing that up about tribal leadership, and again, that's we're spending a lot of time in K-12 with informing our community what AI is and isn't, with that definition changing, you know, by the day.
Awesome, thanks. I'm looking at how much time we have left. I want to pivot a little bit to something that been mentioned a few times, which is funding. And Matt, I just want to hear from you a little bit about what's gone well from that standpoint, what hasn't, what kind of plans you guys have in store for the future.
So previous administration, there was a lot of good funding that went directly to tribes. You know, for the last 15 years, we've been advocating in DC for broadband funding that doesn't go to the state, trickle down to the tribe, that doesn't go to a provider, trickle down to the tribe, but actually goes directly to the tribe. So the tribes can make informed decisions and responsible decisions about what they need in their community, whether that's partner with an outside vendor to come in and build it, but the asset being the tribe's, you know, the design being the tribe's responsibility. And and ultimately serve the tribe as the tribe needs to be served versus how somebody from the outside assumes that they should be served. So hence the tribal broadband boot camps came into play immediately, because a lot of tribes reached out and said, hey, we know what we think we want, but what do we really want? Can we have some conversation and education around this? And so we started working one-on-one with tribes and one on, groups of tribes to be able to better understand these things. So in that round of funding, so Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association got a $4.5 million NTIA Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program grant. And we have infrastructure, we built infrastructure, but we have a little bit of carved out for infrastructure. But what this grant is really doing is it's building a digital learning facility. And we're really looking at that demographic of 16 to 25-year-olds, because on reservations and in that sort of environment, that reservation environment, that tribal community environment, and so rural and removed from resources, we see a big drop off in like that 16 to 25-year-old group, where the 16-year-olds are at risk of not graduating from high school because they either get disillusioned with their future, a number of chaotic reasons, hormones, you name it, right? Girls, everything gets into play, and then they don't have a successful end to high school, which carries them somewhere else. Then there's kids that graduate from high school, and that was kind of like, hey, I did it. Oh, now what? And they don't have a 4-year plan. They don't have the funding for a 4-year plan. They don't see a pathway to the 4-year plan. So this digital learning facility is really opening up the exposure to the realm of technology, where these kids know how to use the hell out of an iPhone or a smartphone, and they can use a tablet, and they've been in school using tablets and doing that kind of stuff, but they don't know what runs that. They don't know the infrastructure behind the things that they know how to do. They know how to run the Xbox and the PlayStation, but they don't know the parts behind that. They don't know that there's a 6-figure salary sitting in the middle of the valley that they live in, where they could actually train up in a vocational scenario, even online certificates in some cases, and actually be a functional member of building network infrastructure. They don't understand that exists. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to help that group or that demographic of students and sort of young adults to be able to better understand what's out there and what the opportunity is. Because every time we've engaged youth on any level at the Tribal Digital Village Network, one of them out of the class has ended up running the network for a long period of time. The person that's currently running TDVNet, Paul Miranda, is a Paula Band of Mission Indians tribal member, and he was my shadow in 2002 on how to build websites, right? And so this kid grew up with over the last 25 years with me, and he is running the TDV network now. Prior, we had a person that was in a summer youth program running the network. It's just those dips into funding opportunity are really valuable. So we try to take massive advantage when they happen. Currently, we don't see a window into funding opportunity in the near term. The only existing broadband funding that exists towards tribes moving forward is the Rural Utility Services Program, the Connect and Reconnect grants. That's the only 2 buckets of money to build broadband that haven't been, or some would, eliminated.
Thanks for that. Terry, I know that these are conversations we've had over the last couple of years. So.
Yeah, so funding is a tough one, and again, not to get political, but I think Marla named it very well as far as some of the challenges on the rescission of funding and pullback and so forth. K-12 education has clearly been under assault by the current administration on a number of fronts. Our state here in California, our California Department of Education, Attorney General, et cetera, this last year, we've spent an order of magnitude more time on lawsuits, on grants, on funds that were already appropriated by Congress and then were illegally withdrawn or held back. The Dear Colleague letter about DEI and other topics have been very, very disruptive. And so federal funding we're having a hard time hanging on to existing funding, let alone any new funding. There's a lot of challenges, again, in the cyberspace. So, again, in the work that I've been plugged into to see organizations like the MSISAC be defunded, during the last administration, good, bad, or otherwise, they were very focused on K-12 education and cybersecurity. They held a first ever cybersecurity summit at the White House. I had the privilege of being invited by the First Lady, Biden, to participate in that. And there was a lot of positive things that were happening, and that kind of all went away. We've seen the cuts to CISA and other supporting agencies that we relied on in K-12 education that we didn't have the resources to tackle ourselves. And so seeing all of those be reduced, the Department of Education being gutted and now quickly being shifted to different parts of the government to further demolish, it's really been painful. So when we talk about funding and resources, I'd say this has been one of the most challenging times for K-12 education. So as we think about connectivity, devices, training, et cetera, literacy, it's all things that we need to do and should do, but have less resources and supports.
So how are you shifting that, given what you have? You'll
Yeah.
have what you have to work with, right? So
Yeah.
how do you go about prioritizing those?
Well, first off, I'm kind of on the cybersecurity side and the broader SLTT community. We recognize that the current administration wants to abdicate responsibility on cybersecurity protections. The narrative has been very clear. States, you need to figure this out on your own. And so we have leaned into that as far as how we're partnering in new ways with California Department of Technology and Cal OES, and how are we partnering across these different SLTT communities. So I wouldn't say there's a perfect answer, but we're finding a way.
Got it. Understood. Danny, I still see you writing out of the corner of my eye, but I do have I think
Poor guy.
unique perspective, right? So you come from a for-profit world. So, and then you've been working in your community for years also, right? So
Right.
talk to me, your notes are not, I know you have a lot to say on this, but I think, funding's a challenge here, right?
Yeah, so for-profit corporations generally have funds that they dish out. I did a program at Stanford. I called it the SAP Engineering Scholars. And it was the Stanford undergraduate, the Summer Undergraduate Research Fellows Program. So I took students I selected 10. It's like $15,000 per student for 8 weeks, so it's kind of expensive. But I took students from tribal, some rural locations, primarily where they were focused on mining, like out of South Dakota, and HBCUs and other minority-serving institutions, to give them an opportunity to get in there and see things. But my experience has been that when you take those funds, philanthropic funds in some cases, that's what I use from SAP, or you get somebody like Mackenzie Scott, and I have to give a shout out to Mackenzie Scott and to Mitch and Frida Kapoor. You find people who are interested in social impact. And, as an alternative to government funds, finding an entity, whether they're a for-profit or, in some ways, a public benefit type corp, to bring funds in, but to work on a specific problem, focus on a problem to be solved. I think you find it in the case of the tribal stuff, the model development, AI model development, getting it to the point where you have it focused for you. And I just come back to, there are other ways to do this, or maybe offsetting expenses. For a municipality, sometimes they just waste money. They just waste money. Other times they do a good job, but maybe there's a better way to do it. And in that case, if you can solve the problem, maybe offset of expenses to this investment in solving a problem, there are other ways. I don't think government is always the only answer.
Understood. I know we've only got a couple minutes left. Did anybody else have anything to add? We're all talked out, but we could talk for another hour, so I appreciate that. I just want to thank you all for your time, and thanks everybody for attending. Appreciate it.
Thank you.